I have to say, I find it fascinating how the mainstream media operates in some ways, because there are times when something is a legitimate story, but it goes completely and utterly ignored by every mainstream media source, every owned and controlled and funded outlet that there is. And the latest instance, until it doesn't, I should have added that last point. It goes completely ignored until suddenly it's not getting ignored anymore. And then the floodgates open, and this thing that had been not even a story to them, apparently it just didn't exist to them, suddenly it becomes something that they are willing to talk about. The latest instance of this involves Rick Salibi at CNN. So, just a couple days. The story about Rick Salibi actually broke a while ago, a couple weeks ago. Project Veritas interviewed a woman who said that Rick Salibi, who is a producer on CNN who works with Jake Tapper, that he had called her and shared in explicit detail how he wanted to abuse his underage stepdaughter. And they replayed their conversation, and it's pretty disgusting. But anyway, Project Veritas ran this story. Project Veritas, no mainstream source wants to give any credence or credit to Project Veritas, but of course. So they ran this story at first without revealing who the CNN producer was in question, whose voice was heard in this phone conversation. And then later, a couple days later, they revealed that the name of the producer was Rick Salibi. So that was, like I said, a couple weeks ago. And for the last couple of weeks, you typed in Rick Salibi CNN into any online search engine, and you got very small dice, small dice. Sorry, let's say small potatoes type of outlets. But nobody in the mainstream was covering it. But as of the last 24 hours or so, suddenly it became okay to talk about this in the mainstream media. So now you got New York Post, The Wrap, NBC, Yahoo, and others, and they're all weighing in on this story about Rick Salibi. Now, I have some curiosity about why this suddenly happened. Why now? What was it that served as the cue for the mainstream sources to be able to mention the name Rick Salibi and what he was accused of doing, and and the fact that this is the second time in quick succession that a high-ranking producer at CNN has been under investigation for doing stuff to kids, or allegedly at least dealing in material that could be construed as child pornography. All right, so let me just read a little bit of this article at the Post. The former CNN producer is reportedly under investigation for serious allegations involving potential juvenile victims. So there's more than one victim. That's interesting. The the expose at Project Veritas, it only covered what he was saying about. He had this footage of his stepdaughter, who was, I think, 15, and he was telling this woman that he was in communication with the kind of things that he wanted to do to her in, very explicit detail. So that's already pretty sleazy and gross, but involving potential juvenile victims, plural. That's interesting. Police in Fairfax, Virginia have launched a criminal probe into Rick Salibi, former senior producer on Jake Tapper's The Lead. The investigation involves serious allegations involving potential juvenile victims, and detectives assigned to the Child Exploitation Squad of the Major Crimes Bureau are leading this investigation. So the Post, which is on the rightish side of the mainstream media, they're sort of the controlled opposite. They and Fox News are sort of the controlled opposition, representing the appropriate bounds of acceptable discourse. In other words, you can disagree with the leftists who control most of the mainstream rhetoric, but if you dissent, if you demur, if you differ your from buying into what those outlets have to say, then you can. That's still okay as long as you don't go beyond what they're saying at some place like the Post or Fox News, in which case you are just an out and out threat to everything decent and should be locked away as soon as possible. So anyway, they acknowledge that this all began because of Project Veritas. I suspect that the other stories that have been published may or may not mention Project Veritas. If they do, it's probably very grudgingly. So Salibi solicited nude photos of a 15-year-old girl, with cops telling Fox News they had been in communication with Project Veritas. Interesting. Again, none of the mainstream media, they all hate Project Veritas. None of them want to admit that Project Veritas is doing anything to steer the discourse. But somehow, for some reason, I guess because damage control, or maybe some other reason, I don't know. Salibi resigned from his role on The Lead after the report detailing the disturbing allegations, according to the Washington Examiner. It's interesting that happened as well. So here you have the face of Rick Salibi. No comment. I'm not going to make any comments on physiognomy here. Anyhow, a CNN rep also confirmed to Fox News that the person in question resigned earlier this month. Okay, so they he was quietly persuaded to resign, and now they can talk about the story. Meanwhile, Salibi's home in Fairfax County has been raided, and electronic equipment has been seized. So he hasn't been arrested, but they've seized his laptop, and they're looking for dubious material that is suspected to be there. Dang. Okay, so I lost it, but I got it back. Earlier this month, John Griffin, 44, was indicted by a federal grand jury in Vermont for attempting to induce minors to engage in unlawful sexual activity, according to the Justice Department. So this is the second CNN producer, and they're both, John Griffin worked closely with Chris Cuomo, and Rick Salibi worked closely with Jake Tapper. These are not small-scale people. So you got two major producers who are into kids, who are into little girls at CNN. Isn't it appropriate to ask, what is the culture at CNN? If two producers, and I don't know how many total producers there are, but two high-profile producers are into this kind of stuff, and I doubt this was any new revelation. I suspect that the people who worked with them some of them probably knew about their proclivities, and the same way, as I said in my previous video on John Griffin, the same way that Jimmy Savile's depredations were well known amongst the BBC and amongst high society generally. It was an open secret. Johnny Rotten talked about how what a sleazebag Jimmy Savile was. So we're talking about stuff that was well known, and there were lots of inside jokes made in all kinds of places. My point is, what does this say? Is this not does this not amount to an indictment of the CNN, the culture at CNN? If high-ranking people are doing things like this, maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe there's just two guys who happen to be into this kind of thing, working in the same job, working with high-profile people, high-profile anchors, news celebrity types like Jake Tapper, like Chris Cuomo. Maybe it's all just isolated. They're both just isolated cases, but one shouldn't be denigrated for possibly connecting some dots and saying to oneself, this place, CNN, might just be a haven for people interested in this kind of activity. And who knows, the major media, the mainstream media, the culture might just be a bit sick. Anyhow, those were two aspects of this story that interested me. The first one is, of course, why it suddenly became okay to talk about Salibi. And I still don't know the answer to that one. And the second one involves the question of what can be said about CNN, that it has two major staffers. Not, like I said, these are not just interns. These are not just hangers-on. These are people who have been around for a while, well-established people within the network. What does this say about them? Did nobody know? Honestly, nobody know what these guys were into. I find that difficult to believe, and I don't believe it. So let me know what you think. My name's Andy Nowicki. Please check out my work at altrightnovelist.com. My latest book, The Insurrectionist, can be found at terrorhousepress.com.